The court is the guardian of the German constitution. The court in charge of European institutions is the European Court. And although the German court reserves the right to review major digressions of European institutions, it only can check the core of the German constitution. So it has to do so in a Europe-friendly manner. And that's its policy, and that's what it has done in the past. It has established certain conditions, interpreting things a bit differently than the European Court, for example, with OMT, or if you remember, when the European Stability Mechanism was set up, the German court insisted that parliaments are being asked to vote on increases.
The ruling could have some impact on the way the Bundesbank behaves going forward. And clearly, as you point out, we need to separate the ideas of where the court has the ability to rule and where it doesn't. Is it possible that this will inhibit the Bundesbank's ability to operate and therefore the ECB's ability to operate?
Well, in theory, yes. Certainly, if the German court imposes certain restrictions on bond buying, the Bundesbank would have to follow that. The German government would have to work on supporting that or pushing that case in the European context. However, the ECB could then sue the Bundesbank in front of the European court. So what I expect, I was actually an expert witness at the public hearing of the German court last July, is at that time, they really talked a lot about how is the proportionality of the bond buying. Because for the court, it makes a big difference whether you just announce massive purchases, such as it happened with OMT, or whether you actually execute them. And at that time, remember, Europe and the euro area was close to potential. Inflation growth was doing fine. So there was a question of proportionality.
Professor, I want to ask you about the criteria, because one of the 4 criteria of these asset purchases is that investors remain in the dark as to what the ECB purchases are. Yet during this crisis, we've seen Italy issue new bonds that effectively you think the ECB would be putting in its portfolio. So how do we manage to keep the interest of investors alive for bond market and purchases without knowing exactly what the ECB is buying at this point? In the past, it used to be by limiting those purchases. How can it be done this time around practically?
Well, I think, first of all, the Accord was ruling on, or is ruling on, the PSPP program, not the PEP program, the pandemic program. Now, with PSPP, the emphasis was on GDP-weighted or capital-weighted purchases. And those are monetary policy, at least in my view. So proportionality will focus, I expect, or proportionality questions will focus on what about GDP weighting, capital weighting, and what about issuer and issue limits, which were set at 33% to avoid that the ECB has to vote against restructurings. So the German court may focus on those limits. And of course, those limits are not necessarily obeyed in the pandemic program. Now, the pandemic program is not subject to review right now, but it could very well be the focus of future lawsuits.